Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Graham Smith. I'm the Chief Executive of Federated Farmers. I'm just going to say a few words and then I'm going to hand over to National President Dr. William Bolston, who will say some words, and then between us we're happy to take some questions from you. The first thing I'd like to say is that, as many of you are aware, I was actually the recipient of the letter, the 1080 contamination letter and package. And so when I read that letter, as a parent, I was outraged. I was outraged that somebody would have the audacity, the temerity, to actually target children and their parents in this way. And so since then, Federated Farmers has worked very closely with the police, with the dairy industry and also the government to ensure that we collectively bring these perpetrators to justice. Beyond that, I'd now like to hand over to Dr. William Bolston to say a few words.
Thanks, Graham. I think the first thing is to just remind you that we did receive a letter in November. It contained a threat, and that threat was around 1080 and infant formula. The letter contained a package that had milk powder in it that was laced with 1080. And we handed that directly to the police. It was the right thing to do. And we also found out that Fonterra had received a similar letter with a similar threat. One of the things that we did after that was to get in touch with Fonterra and actually go around some of their plants. And that was a very reassuring experience. Fonterra, we did that in December, and Fonterra had put in place quite a bit more security than they had before. In fact, it was the proverbial Fort Knox. The other thing that Fonterra did, as you know, in the milk industry has done, is that they've put in place sampling for 1080 in their products. Since the news has broken today or yesterday, we have sent out an advisory to our provincial presidents to tell them what the situation is, and we've also sent out an advisory to our members for them to be vigilant and to report any information that they might know, and to make sure that their milk supplies are secure as they normally are. So that's really what's happened. We've been in touch with the police. They've asked us to look at who we think might be of suspicion. We've given them names that we know of people who are involved in the 1080 debate and allowed them to get on with their work and follow that up. So that brings us to today, and we're happy to answer any questions.
What's the feeling among farmers or your members at the moment?
Farmers in general are outraged, I think, as and angry as the rest of New Zealand are, that anyone could have an act of stupidity like this and put actually our economy at risk.
Why do you think you guys got a letter?
Well, Federated Farmers represents the farming community, and the use of 1080 is used to reduce possum numbers to control the spread of TB across the country.
Sorry, when you got the letter, did you have people in mind or groups in mind that it could have been behind?
No, we don't have anyone in particular, but we did give the police a list of names of people who had written to us or who were on our radar in terms of the 1080 debate. And it's up to the police to really follow that up and work out who the perpetrators might be.
Has there been any other letters like this in the past or anything that's been of this nature before?
We're not aware of any of these sorts of threats before, no.
Graham, did you actually open the letter yourself?
No, it was opened by my assistant, who immediately brought it to our attention, which is absolutely the right thing to do. And then once I read it, I knew that we then needed to pass it on to the police, which we did, and also then talk to the appropriate government people about what needed to occur.
What's your reaction to the timing of the release, the public release of this? I mean, would you have liked to have seen it earlier, or were you happy with the way it's been handled in terms of the quite delayed release?
No, I'm very happy with the way that it has been handled. I mean, I think if you put yourself in industry and government shoes, this was a threat that was targeted for March, and an immediate release might have caused some panic. Not to have released it at all and had it come out would have suggested that our industry and our government couldn't be trusted, and that's not where we want to be. I think if you look back over the last 3 episodes that we've had, DCD, botulism and this, we're actually, while it is a short-term pain, I think that the industry in this country is actually growing a reputation for being quite open and honest and transparent about everything that comes across our desk. And I think that's the way we need to be. We're in a position where people need to trust us. They trust us to provide food for their children and for their babies, and we need to be in that position of trust. And I think this is part of building that trust. As painful as the short-term scenario might be.
You're not worried about the long-term international damage?
I think the long-term international outcome will be positive, not negative. You know, when you see something like this, and we understand that overseas, in other jurisdictions, that while these things happen on a reasonably frequent basis, and they're not put forward to the public, we think that, and the government thought that this was the right thing to do, to actually bring this forward to the public so that they know what's going on.
Will Federated Farmers play any part in sort of the messaging to overseas? I mean, you've got international contacts. Will you be taking action around that line?
Well, certainly we've been fielding calls from international media, and so we've been doing that, and the line has been about particularly, you know, trust in New Zealand as a product, and that we are open and transparent.
What about your own farmer organisations, you know, similar organisations in other parts of the world? You're part of a World Farmers Organisation and so on.
We haven't been approached by any of our other farming colleagues overseas, and I'm not sure that we would expect to be. They're not in the marketplace, but we've had no communications with them.
Are you going to continue to brief your own members? I mean, what's going to be the scenario from here on in terms of this issue? Because they're obviously quite concerned, as you are, obviously.
Yeah. So yesterday we sent out an advisory to our provincial presidents to alert them to what was happening and to give them some advice. And today we've sent out a member advisory, again just reinforcing their own on-farm security, to report anything that they might see as suspicious, but also to report anything that in the past they might have thought was suspicious. I mean, this is something I think where the whole of New Zealand needs to take part in actually catching these perpetrators, catching these people who have made these threats. As idle as these threats might be, we have to take them very seriously, and we want the whole of New Zealand to come in behind the dairy industry and actually help to catch these people. And someone will know where they are.
And I think New Zealand is angry about what's happened, so that's as it should be.
Yeah, sorry if I missed this because I've been start with radio. Are you planning to release the text of the letter that you received?
No, we've handed the letter over to the police, so you need to talk to the police about the letter.
But can you tell us, even like just paraphrase
No.
exactly what it said?
No,
Is that
No.
because the police have asked you not
well,
to?
it is a criminal investigation, and so it's really up to the police to handle that from there.
You didn't feel there was anything distinctive about it, anything that sort of rang any bells, any sort of...
You'll need to ask the police about that. Have a good try that.
Yes.
Also, Radio New Zealand spoke to the New Zealand Infant Formula Exporters Association today, and they're saying that orders have dropped by about 75% for infant formula for companies like Kino's. Does that worry you at all?
Well, I think you'd expect some sort of a hit, but we are only looking at 1 day since the announcement was made, and I think if I were making orders, I would be just holding off to see what was going to come forward. So I think 1 day is not really long enough to get a real feel for what the international market is going to do.
You talk about trust, but if these incidents keep happening, how can the international community have trust in what New Zealand's done?
Well, I think you only need to look at what the outcomes have been. That these have been incidents where we have put our hand up, and in fact, you know, the botulism one came out as being negative. This has come out in a way that in other jurisdictions it may never have surfaced. So I think people will know that if we're not giving that sort of news, that it's not happening, not that it may be happening in the background and we're just not saying anything. And I think that's the right approach. It is trust is about honesty and openness, not about people feeling that nothing's happening when something is happening in the background. So I think we're doing the right thing.
1080 isn't easy to get your hands on if you don't have a license. Do you have any idea who could easily get this product? This, I understand, is a major company that provides 90%, but the other 10%, who do you know is that made up of? Is it individual farmers or smaller companies?
My understanding is that it's actually New Zealand that uses 90% of the 1080 that's produced because we do use it in large quantities. But I think there's a difference between getting hold of a small amount of product and putting it in a small sachet and getting hold of enough product to actually cause damage in the marketplace, other than directly tampering with a tin of milk powder. And that's why we have been saying, the government's been saying, for purchasers to make sure that their tins haven't been tampered with. It would be pretty difficult to get powder into a tin without actually showing that it had been tampered with.
And what about physically getting the 1080? Is that quite hard to do?
My understanding is that it is hard. It's a controlled substance. We in fact have a laboratory that we run ourselves, and we have to account for all those sorts of chemicals. Not that we use 1080, but you have to account for all those sort of chemicals. So I think it would be pretty hard to get any chemical quantity out into the system, and that's what carry out this threat you'd have to do. So it's not just an easy exercise to do. It's relatively, I wouldn't say it's relatively easy, but it's possible to do what they did with a small quantity, but to actually have an effect in the marketplace would be, in my view, extremely difficult. Not impossible, but extremely difficult.
Is the freight very secure, do you know, from the time it arrives in New Zealand to?
So the time it arrives in New Zealand?
Yeah, it comes from the manufacturer in the States.
Oh, you're talking about the security of 1080?
Yeah.
Look, I don't know. You'd have to ask the customs control, but certainly as an exporter, I know that that our containers need to be sealed with a MAF seal, and I would expect that a dangerous good would be treated in exactly the same way.
How much 1080 did the samples you received contain?
You'd have to ask the police that. I don't have that
We're not
information.
aware of that.
One thing that police and the government both says that they've had advice from overseas not to go public with this, that's something overseas, apparently it's part of their best practice that they don't encourage, make sure they encourage everybody to do the same. I know you guys have said that you think going public is good, but are you worried about the encouragement this might give other people, these same people, to kind of step things up?
Well, I think that's a good point, and we do stand on a knife edge in terms of what we do. I think if you look at the scenario where we had said nothing, and this is a very unusual thing to happen in New Zealand. I know in overseas jurisdictions it happens quite often, and they don't say anything about it. But I look at the scenario of where nobody said anything about it, and then the perpetrators came forward and said, we've made this threat, and the government or industry never said anything about it. That to me would undermine trust completely, and that we're not in that game.
You said you've run into 1080 and anti-1080 people in the past. How often does that happen?
It depends on where the debate is sitting. So when you see it in the media, then we tend to get emails from people who are upset about us using 1080s, or if there's a big drop going on, then we tend to get correspondence along those lines. But otherwise, it's not ongoing. It's not something that sits around in the background. We don't get 2 or 3 a week or anything like that.
What sort of briefings are you getting to the government? Are you going to get regular briefings now that you're part of this, or what's going to be the story?
You might want to answer that.
We've worked very, very closely with the government, and that includes ongoing regular briefings. And that's a really important part of the process. And it's also why it gives us confidence in what the police have been doing, because, well, not just the police, but the whole of government response is because we have had some involvement and engagement around that. So I would expect those briefings will absolutely continue.
So you said you've had correspondence of people against 1080 before. Have any of them been threatening at all? I mean, even if it was a minor threat, or signaled any sort of violence or anything like that, or any threatening letter?
Well, none that have come to my attention.
And likewise, I'm not aware of any.
Do you have any idea of how much the government has spent to date on
No, but you could ask them, but I imagine it's considerable. Yeah. They could have killed a lot of possums if we put the money into eradicating possums. Anyone? Any other questions?
Yeah, sure. Sure. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody, for your interest.